Thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program. This is a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew Ledrew, author of the Infinity series and founder of Engine Books. Let's see what we have today. Thank you for joining us on the Write Project podcast, Andrew Peacock. Andrew Peacock is the author of many books and been involved in the writing community for some time. He wrote Creatures from the Rock, for which he won a Newfoundland Labrador Book Award, and A Brave Boy and His Cat. More recently, he wrote Viral, which came out in August 2020 and features a pandemic hitting the world and the effect that it has on Newfoundland closing its borders. I should state that he did not write that in August 2020. He wrote it several years before, meaning that he's in some way psychic. And coming out in 2021, he has Bifocal, a book that he's writing. It's a short story collection that features art in the form of photography with Kaylee Middlecoop. Did I get all that right, Andrew?
That sounds good. Great to be with you.
Excellent. Okay, well, can you tell me a bit about Bifocal? I know that you've been working on that for some time, and that it's finally coming to print now in 2021. How did that come to you? How did you team up with Kaylee? Tell me as much as you can about that and the stories within it.
Yeah, there are two real things that inspired Bifocal. One of them is an event that we hold out in Freshwater that I was part of setting up called Authors in Art. And for the last 5 years, we've had 3 or 4 authors come out to Freshwater and read from their work. And we've had some really interesting people. We've had Lisa Moore and we've had Andy Jones and a number of different well-known authors, and we always try to include somebody who's local as well. And they read a piece that either is something that they've published previously or something they write specifically for the event. And then we get 2 visual artists to interpret the work.
Yes.
And the first year that we did it, I was one of the authors and Kaylee was one of the artists. Kaylee interpreted a piece by Lisa Moore. And it's just such an exciting event that it's very, very different from what you usually see in literary events. And the way that it works is that the author reads and then the 2 pieces of art are unveiled. And you can just hear gasps from the crowd that people haven't sort of anticipated how clearly and in what an interesting manner people are going to interpret this art. Because in most of the cases, the artists come up with something that most of the audience hasn't thought of. That's not what I thought this story was about, or that's an angle at the story that I didn't think of. And after we have the readings and the art exhibited, then we have a discussion where they bring the author and the artists up on stage and talk about where this all comes from. So that's one of the places it comes from. The other place is there's a local gallery in Carbonear that I visited fairly frequently. And I was in one day and saw this one large photograph of a woman floating over water with a long veil behind her.
I believe I know the one you're speaking of, but yes.
Yeah, and just spectacular technically. The Photoshop work on it in this particular print was just amazing. And I assumed that this was an older person who'd done this because this didn't look like work by somebody young, just technically and everything. It looked very mature artistically. And then I found out there was this 23-year-old girl who had done it.
Yep.
And right at that moment, and then I saw some of her other work. And at that moment, I said, I want to do something with her someday. Someday I'd like to do something with this girl. And I met Kaylee. And as you know, she's delightful.
She is, yes.
Yeah. And I said, what would you think of the 2 of us doing a book together? When I have been writing short stories for 5 years at that point. And I said, what would you think if, you try and find some pictures or do up pictures that will fit my stories, and I'll write some stories for some of your pictures. And that was about 5 or 6 years ago now. And we've just been working on it and working on it and working on it. It's not a fast process,
No.
because we don't sort of throw something off. We have put a fair bit of effort into this, and there's not any stories in it and picture combinations that it was just, this will do. We found things that we thought would really work with it. And it was a really exciting process. It was exciting for me to get one of my stories, first of all, to have somebody care enough about the story to put that much work into it.
Yep.
That's wonderful. And then also to see somebody say something about your work that you didn't see yourself. I'm a strong believer when you write a book, it's not yours anymore after you've finished it.
Same.
I read a really interesting talk by Margaret Atwood where she was talking about Handmaid's Tale. And in the television series, the heroine is called June. And Margaret Atwood said she's not called June in the book. And she asked them, why do you call this character June? And she said, well, there's all these other characters. The TV people said there's all these other characters in the book who are May and July and August, and there's no June. It's obvious she's June. And Margaret Atwood said, she's right.
Yeah.
That wasn't mine, but she's absolutely right. She is June, even though I didn't know it. If you
Yeah.
look at the book carefully, she has to be June. And that's an exciting thing to do so immediately when you have a photographer interpret your work. You see what somebody else sees in the piece. And that's very exciting.
That is exciting. That just sounds exciting talking about it. So this is
Mhm.
interesting. I didn't realize that there was. Can I ask if in the finished product, the manuscript that we have now, because you mentioned that you would write stories for some of her pictures, and she would do pictures for some of your stories. I didn't
Yes.
realize. I thought it was only the former. So were there any photos that she did that were inspired by any of your pre-existing short fiction?
Yeah, yeah, there
Wow.
was, yeah, yeah, there was some of it that had been, I gave her a pile of things that I liked that I'd done before, and then we started into new stuff as well. And I also went through some of her old photography and some of her new photography, and there were a couple of pieces that I came with, that you'd look at immediately and say, I know what I'm going to do with this.
Yeah.
It's interesting, when I was telling you about authors in art before, they talked in a lot of the cases to the artists and said, how did you come up with this? And the common story was, I read it 6 times and I started some sketches, and then I decided on something else, and it went on and on and on. And there was one guy I remember one year that just said, oh, I read it and I was halfway through and knew what I was going to do.
Yeah.
It was just there immediately. And I find that just so fascinating that there are those different ways that you interpret any kind of art, whether you're going to even do anything about the art. I find that sometimes looking at a painting, there'll be paintings that I get as soon as I see, and then other ones that 3 days later you go, oh, I know what that's about. I understand it now. I didn't get it at all when I saw it. And that certainly happens with books. And I think it happens with good literature,
Yeah, absolutely.
it's well written. You see more when you come at it again.
Big time, yeah. I find that interesting. The second one you're talking about, where he was saying that I know halfway through, like what I was going to do, because I often know by the time I'm done a first chapter of a book that we're publishing over at Engine, usually by the end of the first chapter, I have a vague idea of what I would like the cover to be. Sometimes I don't
Mhm.
get my way, but like I get it early on. And I find usually that it's because I want the start of the book to reflect on the cover, because that's what they're going to see first. You know what I mean? Like
Yes,
it's
yes.
the first chapter has to grab you, the cover has to grab you. You
Yeah,
might as
yeah.
well answer the question right off the bat.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Something that we should perhaps mention is that the cover for Viral is done by Kaylee as well.
It was, which is wonderful kismet. I mean, like we had, despite Viral coming out first, we had assigned it second. We'd signed you for Bifocal first, so we had already signed Kaylee and knew we were going to be working with her. So it just seemed like common sense at that point that when we signed Viral to approach her and see if she would do a cover.
Yeah, and one of the things that I like about Kaylee's interpretation in all of her work is that it's almost never literal.
Yeah,
There's nothing in Bifocal that you can say, yeah, that's a picture of what happened in the story. That's not it. And there's some of them even where it's got nothing to do with the literal story. It's about an idea in the story. And even the cover for Viral, there's a guy standing in front of an empty city.
Yep.
And there's not really a place where that happens in the story.
No, it's
I
more
thought,
about the themes and the
yeah.
ideas, and yeah,
And I think that's good art. And I think that's an interesting cover too. You know, there's a kind of a loneliness to the cover and a bit of desolation to the stuff in the background that reflects the sort of tone of the book. But again, it's not a literal retelling of what's inside.
for sure, for sure. Yeah, I always sometimes I get pushed back in my role as wearing the publishing hat from authors. You know, you'll get a picture that seems like it perfectly suits the themes of the novel and the tone of the novel and communicates to the reader, you know, what is going to be inside the novel and what they can expect from it. And the author will come back and say, no, this like character you've got on the front of the book, her eyes are light green and my character's eyes are dark green, so that cover's not going to work. And I'm like, who cares? Like,
You know, my feeling with Viral is it wouldn't have even bothered me if it was a woman on the front, even though the
oh yeah,
main
no,
character is a man. You know, it's not a literal interpretation of the book.
for sure.
Yeah.
What is your favorite comic book character?
Spider-Man.
Awesome. That is
No,
an
no
amazing answer.
hesitation. When I was in university going to vet school, I subscribed to Spider-Man. I had it come to my mailbox, and everybody else laughed at me, how juvenile you are. Those times were different than superheroes are now.
Yeah,
Back
yeah,
in the days in your 20s, you didn't read comics, you know?
yeah,
Things like Spider-Man and stuff like that, the very early ones.
yeah.
I'd pull out my Spider-Man and everybody'd say, you still read that stuff? And then the next sentence was, can I see it after you?
I love Spider-Man. He's one of my favorites. Now I'm wondering who was right. See, this is dangerous because I could get in a huge tangent now, but I'm not going to let myself. But like now I'm sitting there like, ooh, I wonder who was writing Spider-Man when Andrew was reading it.
That, it was the very first ones.
Oh wow.
When I had a friend who was a serious Marvel collector. I'd have to check to make sure but I know some of the stuff like Submariner, the very first ones, you know, like
Yep.
starting number one, Fantastic Four, the very first ones, you know, he'd have the first 100 of them, you know?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, jealousy.
I had a bunch of them from my early teens, and they got thrown out at some point, but they were, you know, this is like Marvel stuff from the 60s, right?
Yeah. If only we'd known, you could that could have been your retirement. Screw
Well,
veterinary. Like,
yeah,
my
the
God.
only reason that they're worth money is because we all threw them out.
That's true. I try to explain that to modern comic book collectors where they're like, ooh, I bought this limited edition one. I was like, yeah, no, see, and I've got it saved. I'm like, that's why it'll never be worth anything
Right.
because everyone's saving it. Like,
Yeah.
there's this horrible axiom. I explained it to my dad once and he got very, very just annoyed in general at the world. But I was like, in order for something to be worth a lot, it had to at one point be worth less than nothing.
Yeah.
Like someone had to have thrown most of the copies of something out. So now it's truly rare.
Yeah.
Like even food, like lobster back in the day that my mom was growing up, they'd be sent to school with lobster sandwiches because it was the cheapest meal could have.
Yeah. Poor people food.
Yeah, but then those people grew up on it and loved it, and it became something nostalgic to them. So we realized we could jack up the price and make people pay to relive their poor people food from when they were young.
Yeah.
Maybe in 20 years' time, bologna sandwiches will be the most expensive thing on the planet.
Maybe we'll have to save it up.
Did you ever consider writing under a pseudonym?
No, not really. Not really. I think it's maybe crossed my mind, but not really. There are things that I would like to write that are political. Viral is in a way political, and sometimes it's tempting to not stand up for what you believe. But I think in the end you need to. There's a blog on my website about how one of the characters in Viral is really Donald Trump, and you know, there are people who won't like that, but you say what you believe.
Yeah, and I got that when I read it, and it's honestly you're not hard on that character. Like if someone has a problem with that allegory, then they have a problem with reality, because
Mhm.
basically all you do is you take Trumpism and you turn it into, okay, but what if it was this local? Like all you do is adapt it for the
Yeah.
situation. So I
It-
mean, it's not like you're being out of control with it, you know?
yeah. It's interesting with that character, digressing here a little bit, but with that character, I tried when I wrote it to try and understand what made him tick.
Yeah,
You know, and I thought like he does some bad things, but there's reasons why he does it. And I'm just amazed at how many people tell me that they just hate that character. I
yeah,
have people tell me that they just have to put the book down.
yeah.
And he doesn't, he doesn't kill anybody, or he's not, he's not evil. I don't think, but
I
people,
think there's a bit of Trump fatigue, so I think you might
yeah,
be getting a like people are hearing this in their media constantly, and they pick up this book to escape, and then there's this Trumpian character in the book.
it could be.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Andrew Peacock, how did publishing your first book change your writing process, if at all?
It changed one big thing in me. When I wrote my first book, I had an idea that I had my own voice and that I didn't really want to listen to anybody else telling me about how to write.
Hmm?
And being published with my first book, I was lucky enough to have one of the best, if not the best, nonfiction editor in Canada edit the book. And I learned so much from his editing. He approached me first, sat down with me and talked about the book before he began the edit, and did what they call a substantive edit, where it's just about the direction the book's going and not about anything specific in it.
Yep.
And he said to me at that point, gave me some very good pointers for the book, and also said, now, when you see the edits back from me, it's going to look like a death from all the red.
Okay. Yeah. 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 I've been there.
But you're a really good writer. He says, your stuff is really good. That doesn't mean anything. That's the way I edit. And he said, you've got to consider everything that I say in editing as suggestions. And that made me confident to deal with it. And then when I saw his stuff, I was clever enough, I suppose, to realize he's right
Yeah.
99% of the time. You
Yeah.
know,
There's very rare that my editor is wrong. I would say 95% of the time they are right, and of the remaining 5%, 2% of the time of that their opinions are valid, just it's a matter of opinion. And
Mhm.
only like 3% am I like, no, get out of here.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing for editors to realize. I know that my brother talked about in one of his books, he had an editor tell him, this character's too nasty.
Mm,
That's not an editor's job.
yeah,
That's not
big
the
time.
kind of stuff that editors should say, like, I really don't like this character. Well, that's got nothing to do with you as an editor. That's a whole different thing.
There are editors I've worked with in the past, and I'll obviously never name names, where I felt like there was a bit of this isn't a mistake, it's just not how you do it. Like there's a certain amount of like a good editor will read your work and realize what your voice is and
Yes.
will make sure that your voice is consistent.
Yeah,
A not as good editor will try to make your work into their voice, which will
absolutely.
never work.
Absolutely. Their voice and also their plot. It would have been better if this happened here.
Yeah,
You can't do that.
yeah, no, no. I've had a few. I've had especially Aaron Vance, who is my editor-in-chief, but also specifically edits all my books and started out on the first of my adult crime series.
Mhm.
And I when she makes a plot suggestion, I take it fairly seriously at this point, because at this point she's been
Mhm.
through enough of the books as I am. Don't
You-
always take it, but I take it very seriously.
yeah, you need to have a pretty good relationship to be doing that stuff as
Yeah,
an
for
editor.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Andrew Peacock, have you ever gone on a literary pilgrimage where you traveled to get inspiration to write, or traveled to learn about a place so that you could write about it?
I suppose I did. The earliest one, my memoir, Creatures That Rock, is veterinary memoir, and of course the standard for that is James Herriot. And I did the pilgrimage. I went to James Herriot country and visited the clinic and all of that kind of stuff, you know. And it was inspiring. It's inspiring to see the effect that a single writer can have. James White is the name of the guy that wrote the James Herriot books. Alfred White, sorry, I guess it is. And he sold 60 million books.
Oh, wow.
And in veterinary schools in North America, they figure that his books doubled the number of applications for veterinary school. So that's the effect he had on people's lives. You know, that's
That's
pretty big.
incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. Andrew Peacock, how do you select the names of your characters?
I'm pretty random about it. I'm pretty random about it. I just run through names. And occasionally I'll write for a while. And it's a bit like what we were talking before about how it's not important to write well. I think it's not important to have good names for your characters when you start either.
Yeah,
And in Viral, the name of one character, I won't say anything about it or why, but one character's name changed after I decided how things were going to end. It was
okay.
their name was different.
Okay, interesting. All right.
You might get that.
I might. I think I do. Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Um, Andrew Peacock, how many hours a day do you write? Or another way to look at it is, how long does it take you to finish a book?
I I write in the mornings. I run first thing every morning and then I write, and I don't write hours, I write numbers. I write 1,500 words every day.
Oh, wow, that's
And
that's an impressive turnout.
that takes me usually 2 to 3 hours.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's other time that's involved besides that, that would be research, just sitting, thinking, or walking and thinking about where a story is going. I get a lot of my ideas sleeping. You know, I wake up in the morning with ideas. The end of Viral is a dream.
I believe it.
I dreamt that.
I
And
call it a nightmare, but that might be giving too much away. Yeah.
no, what happened was I had a dream one night that I was watching television, and the story of Viral was on a TV show, and I was really upset that somebody had my story. You know, this was very much like my book that I was writing, which I hadn't finished.
Yeah.
But the TV series had a really clever end to it, I thought. And when I woke up, I was just really ripping mad that, you know, this book, I've wasted all my time because somebody's already done that. And it took me, as often does when you wake up, a long time to straighten out the difference between dream and reality.
Yeah.
And I realized that's mine. You know,
Yeah.
that dream is mine. I can use that.
Yeah.
And that was the end of the book. It came to me in a dream.
That's very amusing.
Yeah.
Woke up angry that someone else had written something like yours and ended it better than you, only to have realized, oh wait, actually,
That was me.
be funny.
And
Yeah,
I,
no, I've done that where I remember once I was several times I had it on my to-do list to go to the store and get groceries the next day, and I remember thinking about it as I was going to sleep and remembering what I needed to pick up and all like that, that I dreamed I went to the store, and then was so convinced that I'd done it that I then didn't go to the store, because I was like, oh, okay, well, I got that done. Didn't
yeah,
work out well. Try explaining that to your wife. It's
yeah.
okay. I went in a dream.
Works for me.
Yeah. Andrew Peacock. Does writing energize you, or does it exhaust you? When you're done, are you like jazzed up to like, yeah, okay, now I'm gonna get the day started, or does it just take the energy from you?
It's not consistent. I would say most of the time it energizes me. One of the things that's interesting with writing to a word number is I stop pretty well when I hit 1,500 words.
Yep.
And a lot of times I'll get to a point that's really interesting, and there's a part of me that wants to write on. And I say, no, I'm stopping here. And that's exciting
Yeah.
to sort of be thinking, oh, what am I going to do with this tomorrow? I can't wait to get at this again tomorrow and put down the extra 1,500 words, another 1,500 words of this. I've had a few times when I just have to carry on, and I maybe write 3,000 words in a day, but it's almost a discipline to not do that.
Yeah. My writing goal is a little bit lower than yours. Mine's currently, I used to do 2,000 words in a day, but I find that since and again in the morning like yours, I find that since the business has been taking off, more of my time has to go towards that. So I can only carve out enough time for 500 words, but I always want to write more. And I've been telling people since I started doing this how wonderful it is to stop at 500 words and know that you could keep going because you know what you're going to write tomorrow.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you don't have to sit there and stare at the cursor. Like you already know what the next sentence is and you might jot it down or something like that.
Yes.
And then,
Yeah.
yeah, it's good to leave something in the tank, to not just exhaust yourself, you know?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Andrew Peacock, do you read book reviews? And if so, how do you deal with good ones or bad ones?
I do read book reviews, I'm ashamed to admit. I think you probably shouldn't. One of the things that I'm on Goodreads, and
Okay.
one of the things that I do on Goodreads is the writing community in Newfoundland is wonderful, and I have a lot of friends now who are writers. And I have stopped reviewing or even giving stars to books in Goodreads.
Okay.
I'll write down that I've read them, but I won't rate them, because I know how difficult it is as a writer. It's foolish, but it does hurt when you get a bad review.
It
Some
can.
people, it does hurt, and it shouldn't. But I I don't want to, especially with friends, if you read a friend's book and you think that wasn't that good, I don't want to lie and give it 5 stars because they're a friend.
Yeah.
And I don't want to give them 3 either.
Yeah. When I started to become more a part of the community, I'll still give stars, and I might not in the future, but I kind of made a promise to myself that basically I would never give anything below 3 stars. You know what I mean? Just because at that point you're being not nice. You know what I
And
mean?
I think there are people out there, particularly on Goodreads, that give 1 star just to do it. It's
I think as someone who's a small press publisher, I always encourage people like readers to leave an honest review, but I also caveat and say if the book's brand new, like there's no reviews yet,
yeah,
and you really hated it, feel free to give me your 1 star in 6 months' time, because that 1 star review, when it's the only review on there, might
yeah,
kill it. You know what I mean?
that's not helpful at all. It's not helpful, economically, but it's also terrible for the writer.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I fully accept that that person, didn't like the book.
Mhm.
It's just, um, it can prevent it from finding the audience that will like it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. Well, to those listening, you can check out Viral now wherever finer books are sold, either in store or on the Engine website or on Amazon. And you should be able to pre-order you should be able to pre-order Bifocal when this interview goes live. If not, order it. But no, I think we'll still be in pre-order stage. Okay.
All right, well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.